Hi knitters, it's now time in our Debbie Bliss Winter Blanket KAL to learn how to sew these squares together, and I'm going to show you how to work mattress stitch on garter stitch to create this fantastic invisible join, whether it's horizontal or vertical. It's going to look great. Let's get sewing. Right, so when you've finished all your squares, I want to show you how to sew them together. And what we want is for everything to sit nice and flush and neatly. So we're going to be sewing up these garter stitch seams together. And there are two things to sew up: the seams at the bottom, the cast on and cast off edges, but also side by side, the way these squares fit together. So I'm going to first of all show you the side by side seams. And if you look at garter stitch, it's made up of the little purl bumps that show up on the garter stitch, little smiles and frowns we call them. So you can see a little bump going this way. This has a little frowns one side of the purl bump, and then the others are the little smiles. And each garter stitch ridge actually is showing us two rows. So you can see the row here of smiles and then a little row here of frowns. And when we sew up the sides to do a garter mattress stitch, we're going to work into the smiles and the frowns for both sides. So we begin by taking a length of yarn. Now you might have left yourself really nice long tails. I'm going to show you how to do this with this pale blue just to show up on here, but obviously when you do this you'll be working in the same colour as your squares. So we begin by just coming into the bottom of the square and leaving a nice tail at the bottom like that. Excuse me. So now I'm going to look at the side of my square here and find the very first, here we go, little frown. It's a little garter stitch bump that's a frown there. I'm going to put my needle through there. And then I'm going to go onto the side of my garter stitch over here, and I'm going to find a smile. And there's a little smile just there, sort of the equivalent on the other side. So we're going from a frown into a smile. And then I'm just going to pull my yarn through. Then I'm going to come over here and have a look for the next little frown, which is there on the edge. I'm going to put my thread through there. And I'm going to keep this stretched out so you can see just how invisible it gets. And then we come over here to look for another smile. And there's a little smile there. So we're going from frown to smile, from frown to smile. I'm just going to pull it through like that. So I come over here, I found this little frown. So I'll pop my needle under the frown. Just trying to do this so you can see. And then I'm coming over here, and the first smile I can see just there. So I'll pop my needle under that smile. And let's do a few more of those. So we're looking for a frown. There's one there. And then I'm coming over this side to look for the smile, which is there. And so we work from frown to smile, from frown to smile. Do another couple. There's a frown. And then come over here to look for a smile, the next smile in the row. Now, when we work mattress stitch, what happens is when you've worked these stitches and you've done a few, if you hold the bottom here and then I pull this, you can see that if you're using the same colour yarn, it would be absolutely invisible, but it creates a sort of a really nice flat seam of continuity between those two that looks like the garter stitch is just continuing. It's a really clever stitch. So remember, we go from a frown on one side. So I put my needle into the frown, come onto the other side and look for the next smile. There it is. We're doing frown there and a smile there on the other side. And then when you've got a few, pull the magic loop there, whoosh, and it's really neat. And on the back, it's also really neat too. So all you need are frowns and smiles. Let's do another one. There's a frown, a little frown-shaped pearl bump, and then come over here and find a smile. There's one. A pearl bump that's a frown. And then there's our next little smile there. Pop your needle in. And then when you've got a few stitches together, put your finger there to anchor it and just pull. And that produces that great flat seam. So that is how we do the seaming for the blanket when it's the side seams together. So the second seam that we need to be able to sew is the one here, which is between the cast off and cast on edges of your garter stitch border. Now this works in a similar way. There are lots of different ways of sewing up a cast on seam and a cast off seam. Some people use the little stitch legs that are underneath the edge of the seam, but when you do that, you end up with quite a chunky overlap, and we don't really want that in this case. We need a nice flat seam. So having had a little go at this, I think the best way to do it is to follow along with your frowns and smiles in the same way that we did before. So I'm going to bring my yarn up from behind so that the yarn is on the... I should have mentioned actually, you want to have your squares right side facing up when we do this, so that you can see this is the front of the seam. And exactly the same when you do these toss on edges, have your work right sides up. So I've brought the yarn from behind there. I'm going to come into the end of the seam there. There's a little smile there. And I'm going to come back through a smile into a frown. And do the same thing the other side, from a frown, oopsie, into a smile. And I'm going to zigzag, almost really like a whip stitch, along the edges here, from into frowns and smiles, coming backwards and forwards like a little snake. And this causes a sort of almost like you have the bumpy up and down shape of a garter stitch ridge, but I'm doing it with the sewing as well. So it does look a bit like a whip stitch. I'm going to come backwards and forwards through these, and in exactly the same way, when I pull this a bit tighter, you'll see that it joins together. So if I now, you can see that's quite loose, but if I hold that and then pull both sides, we get a really nice flat seam on both sides. And because I'm using the same colour here, you can see it doesn't show up on the same colour as well. So if you use the same colour for seaming as you have done for the base colours of your squares, you won't see this join at all. So we'll just do a few more of these. Come from the bottom, from a frown into a smile. And then we come back the other way. Obviously this is a bit strangely unnatural because I'm doing it while it's flat, whereas you would probably pick it up in your hands. But this way you don't lose any of the space of the blanket because you haven't got a big seam to deal with. So again, I've got a little bit of the Loch Ness Monster going on there with these bumps, but it does echo the rise and fall of the garter stitch, and it just looks like a really, really nice seam. So once you've done a few more stitches, every little while, just hold it down and pull. And there is a really nice flat seam. So that's how we seam the cast on and cast off edges and the vertical bars. The other thing that you can do with this blanket is you can knit some blank squares, and then you can personalise your squares with initials, with the date or a year. If it's for a baby, you might want to put on the baby's date of birth or the baby's initials, or just, well, absolutely anything at all, just by either this one I've done here with some Swiss darning, which is an M for Marion. I've put here just a really sweet chain stitch, or you can use surface crochet, anything you like to embroider things onto the yarn. And again, you can use duplicate stitch, which is a nice and easy way, there you go, to go over the top of the stitches, which is what we did with the Christmas tree earlier on. You can embroider some flowers, hearts, anything you like, but just add some blank squares and some embroidery, and you can really make it very personalised and sweet. So once you've sewn your blanket all together, you might want to add a few different kinds of motifs for fun, and they could include personalising things with extra letters. You can either Swiss darn them like I have done here, or you could embroider them or crochet them. Overlaid crochet works really nicely. But if you want to, and if it's a baby blanket, you might want to add somebody's name or a date of birth. It's a really fun thing to do. And just remember, because these are squares, you can add to them and keep adding until you've got the blanket of your dreams. I hope you've really enjoyed working on this Debbie Bliss KAL. The winter blanket is a free download. You'll find it in the description below. And well, happy knitting.